Today I'm going to be talking about the most renowned researchers on marriage and intimate relationships, John and Julie Gottman. They're a married couple, and they work out of Seattle, Washington, and they've been at it for going on 50 years. They might even be retired at this point, I don't know. But they call their research center the Love Lab. And I do a lot of marriage counseling, and I depend on their material because it's the best around. You know, you go right to the top. I actually give this 6-page document to my couples to read for homework. And I'm going to be citing their methodology for helping couples have a healthy relationship. The first thing I want to point out is that, and this is to illustrate that they have relationships down to a science because they've been at it so long. The Gottmans can predict with over an 80% success rate which couples are going to stay together and which are not going to, and those who are not going to make it, those who are going to divorce if they do certain behaviors a lot. I'll get into that in a moment. So I'm going to be focusing on what they call solving manageable problems. But I do want to just give you the headings of the few things that are in here that they teach their clients. Okay? So the first level is called love maps. And that is couples really getting to know each other on deeper and deeper levels. Second is fondness and admiration, that they like each other, that they admire each other, that they build each other up, they don't tear each other down. They talk about their strengths and their positives. The third level is called turning toward, and that involves things as simple as, I say to my partner, look at the cloud formations today. And she says, I'm busy reading my book right now. So they advocate that even this small thing that you would think wouldn't make much of a difference, if the response was, let's look at it together. Show me what you mean. What are you thinking? It's engagement. That's what they're talking about. The fourth level is positive sentiment override. That's kind of complicated. I'm not going to get into that. But it's about positivity in a relationship. What I want to go into depth about is the fifth and final level, which is managing solvable problems. Now, let me say a word about that. The Gottmans have found that about 69%, think about that, you would think they would round it off to 70, but no, around 69% of conflicts between couples aren't actually resolvable issues. They may have to do with, they were brought up so differently, they had such different role models for marriage, how differently men and women think. And I can tell you from my own practice that my couples, they get into trying to, the man tries to get her to see the masculine side, the woman tries to get him to see the feminine side, and it's not actually resolvable and gets them into cycles that have a negative feedback loop. So they talk about couples actually identifying, where can we meet here? What common ground do we have? And for the managing of solvable problems, they have 5 skills to do that. And I actually have my clients, as I said, read this for homework, and then we practice and I coach them in the sessions. The first one starts with startup, what they call startup. And they distinguish softened startup from harsh startup. Softened startups begin with an I statement. I feel, we haven't been intimate that much lately. Can we talk about that? A harsh startup would be, you never want to be intimate. You're always busy with this, that, and the other thing, and, you don't have time for me. Now, here's another percentile. The Gottmans say that depending how a conflict is started, if it's negative, you have a 4% chance of reaching a positive outcome. Think about that. If you start off with a criticism, you have a 4% chance of actually doing some good conflict resolution. So startup is very important. The second skill they use is called repair. Repair is, for example, they have a good softened startup and they get off to a good start. But 3 or 4 or 5 minutes later, they're criticizing each other. Repair is the skill to say something that gets them back on a positive track. In fact, they have a list, I give this to my clients, of statements you can say to repair on a positive track. And notice how often I'm using the word positive. That's very important throughout their whole system, what's called the Gottman method. So that's the second skill, repair. A very important third skill is the ability to physiologically self-soothe. Let me say a word about that. I can attest from 34 years of counseling that couples easily become physiologically aroused in a negative way. They get into anger, they get into irrational thinking. And the Gottmans say that they should take a break, whether it be 5 minutes or, this is such an intense issue. Let's look at this later today or even tomorrow. Let's sleep on it. So they, again, have these percentages of if you can't physiologically self-soothe, the likelihood of this having a positive outcome, that goes by the wayside. So I coach my couples to take a break, take a few deep breaths, think about what they want to say next and be intentional about it, and still soft and welcoming. They even actually attached monitors and took their pulse. And they said clients, when their pulse gets above 95 beats per minute, they couldn't reason well. They became irrational. They started in with the personal criticisms. And so they take a time out. Like I said, I coach them and start again. So the ability to physiologically self-soothe, very important. The fourth out of the 5 skills is accepting influence. I love this one. Accepting influence is, in my own words, not theirs. I am distilling this down into a simple sentence. It's holding the belief that despite your opinions, even if they're strong opinions and they're reliable, they're believable, that you hold the belief that your partner might have some insight that would shed light on it and may influence your thinking. Accepting influence, accepting that your partner might have something to add that will make you look at it a little bit differently. And the fifth and final skill is an old golden oldie, and that is the willingness to compromise. That's also a very important one. So those are the 5 skills for solving manageable problems. But let me circle back around to what I said before, that they can predict with a very high, over 80% rate of accuracy, which couples were going to make it and which were not. And they base that on four things, four negative things, that when couples do these four things to excess, that they're likely to either stay miserably married or divorce. Now, before I tell you what those four things are, let me say that we all do these things from time to time. What the Gottmans are talking about is couples are in a cycle of entering into these negative things. And again, the wheel goes round and round and it has that negative feedback loop. As a matter of fact, they have dubbed these four things the four horsemen, as in the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And those four things are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. Let me talk a little bit about those. Criticism, they call the gateway drug. You know, it's been well known for decades that some people who work with addicts believe that things like marijuana is a gateway drug. What does that mean? It's a gateway. When they use that, there becomes a high likelihood that they will use other drugs and stronger drugs and more dangerous drugs, such as LSD, acid, and all these things hallucinogenic. Okay, so they call criticism the gateway drug. Defensiveness, if a partner responds to the first thing their partner says with, "Oh no, I don't do that. You've got that all wrong, and you're just attacking me," and they don't, again, it's about, it goes back to softened. It goes back to, there's got to be a lot, at least a good amount of humility here to be able to look at yourself honestly and see your own faults. So defensiveness engaged in excessively is the second one of the four horsemen. Stonewalling is something that men tend to do more often than women, and that is, "I'm not talking to you, talk to the hand," and they withdraw. Men do that more than women, and oftentimes women will follow the man. Let's say he goes, two rooms away in the house and doesn't want to talk about it. And that's a bad strategy, because the man may need some time to collect himself and come back to a positive place and re-engage instead of stonewalling. And you can't blame women for doing that, because women are naturally so relational that when there's a threat to the bond, they tend to pursue. So this is all taught in the Gottman method. And the last one is contempt. Now, this is what I say to all of my couples. Contempt is criticism on steroids. Contempt is criticism that's very personal. Let me give an example. Here's criticism. The man comes home from work. Let's say they have 2 or 3 children under the age of 8. He comes home and he walks through the door and there are toys strewn all over the floor. And he walks in and, in a disappointing voice, he says, "Sweetie, you know what time I come home. Can't you pick up these toys, so I'm not tripping over everything?" I remember tripping over things when I had 3 kids. But she may respond with defensiveness. She may say, "You know what? I picked up after the kids 15 minutes ago, turned my back in the kitchen, and they threw the toys all over again. So I did try to prepare for your coming home." So she gets defensive, but you can understand why, because she just made an effort to make it clean. So he started with a criticism. Contempt is the same man walks through the door, sees the things on the floor and says, What is this? We live in a pigsty? You're just like your mother. Your mother never kept house well. It's criticism on steroids that's very personal and very wounding. And here's what I say to my couples: contempt has no place in a loving relationship. Out of the four, that's the one that is most damaging when it gets very severely personal. So I'll wrap it up with that and encourage you, if you want. The Gottmans have written many books. They're online. They have so much more material that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so that's my presentation for today. I hope you got something out of it and you make it something that's helpful for you in your relationship, whether you're in counseling or not.